lies. It was God introducing himself. The fourth thing God did to introduce himself was in Exodus chapter 8 from verse 20 to verse 22. The Bible said God commanded flies to sojourn in the camps of the Egyptians. Flies in their numbers. They fell on the Egyptians. They made life miserable for them. Am I talking to someone? It was a mysterious plague that fell on Egypt livestock, and all their animals with which they plowed their farms began to die all of a sudden. Am I talking to somebody here? The sixth thing the Lord did was in Exodus chapter 9 from verse 8 to verse 9. The Bible said there was an infestation of boils. Boil came out of every Egyptian person. It was like an epidemic. It was a pandemic. Every man born of an Egyptian woman began to bring forth boils from all parts of his body. It was a massive epidemic. It was God introducing himself. If you read Exodus chapter 9 as well, verse 22 to verse 23, there is something called hail. It was falling from heaven. There was thunder. The whole place was shaking. It was much more than an earthquake. It was God introducing himself. Am I communicating with somebody here? If you read Exodus chapter 10 from verse 4 to verse 5, God also went further to introduce himself like a locust. A locust army fell on Egypt, and all their plants were eaten. It was a heavy flow of locusts. People were disheartened. People were discouraged. People began to take their own lives because they had never seen a force as mighty as the locust army that fell on the land of Egypt. Am I talking to somebody here? The ninth thing that God did in his process of introducing himself is in Exodus chapter 10 from verse 21 to verse 22. God brought darkness on the earth. God brought darkness to the Egyptian families. The Bible called it darkness that can be felt. It was the first time I was hearing that a man can be seeing darkness and a man can also feel darkness. It was so dark that even their skin testified that there was darkness. Nobody could go out, nobody could come in. It was God introducing himself. The final thing that God did in the bid of introducing himself is in Exodus chapter 11 from verse 4 to verse 7. Bible says God sent the angel of death into the land of Egypt, and every firstborn son, every firstborn of animals, they were all murdered in one night. It was God introducing himself. I don't know, ask you, where is your God? I don't know who is threatening you because it's connected to a cult. And this morning I want to tell you, before you step out of this church service, my God will introduce himself in your family. I don't know who is saying, who is calling you a mockery, or who is mocking at you because they feel you are a Christian without evidence. They are laughing at you because there is no fruit of the womb after marriage. They are mocking you and they feel God is helpless in your life. Today I want to prophesy, my God shall introduce himself in your family. Amen. My God shall show up because of you. Amen. I said God will show up because of you. Amen. The same way he introduced himself in the days of Pharaoh, he shall introduce himself in your father's house. Amen. He shall introduce himself in your mother's house. Amen. He shall introduce himself in the place you married. Amen. He shall introduce himself in the place of your business. Amen. Rise up on your feet and shout at him like a thunder. Amen. Let me look at them and say, introduce yourself.
Introduce yourself.
Daniel chapter 11 and verse 32. The Bible said, they that do know their God, listen to me. God has to show up. If God does not show up, the mockery cannot end, the poverty cannot end, the shame cannot end. God has to show up. God should not allow them ask you, where is your God? God has to show up. Am I communicating here? How come unbelievers are gathered and they are laughing at you, and you are a Christian, you speak tongues, you walk in church? God has to show up. How long will you remain in this life? How long will you remain in this condition? God has to show up. And David said, let God arise and his enemies be scattered. This morning service, I lay word on you. I prophesy on you.